The heroes of the A-Team once built tanks from scraps and defied every enemy. But nothing could prepare them for the battles that came after the cameras stopped rolling. From dazzling fame to devastating falls, their journey to 2025 is shocking, tragic, and unforgettable. You won't believe how much they've changed until you see it for yourself. Mr. T as B.A. Baracus. B.A. Baracus was the muscle of the A-Team 1983. The mohawked mechanic who could lift an engine with his bare hands and flatten any enemy in sight. At just 31 years old, Mr. T made the role unforgettable, fusing his street-born toughness with larger-than-life charisma. But while audiences saw a hero, Hollywood saw a stereotype it refused to let him escape. The machine of fame swallowed him whole. After Rocky III and the A-Team, his face was everywhere. Action figures, cartoons, lunchboxes. Yet every job reduced him to the same caricature. Serious scripts never arrived. When he tried to reinvent himself with projects like Be Somebody or Be Somebody's Fool. 1984, critics laughed, and Hollywood quietly closed its doors. He had become a product, not an actor. At home, things unraveled further. His marriage broke, his relationship with his children grew distant, and the fortune he had earned in the 80s shrank as fast as his popularity. When he was diagnosed with T-cell lymphoma in 1995, the world barely noticed. The once unstoppable Mr. T was fighting for his life in near silence. The treatments drained him physically and financially. He sold off jewelry, canceled appearances, and wrestled with depression. The chains that once symbolized his strength now felt like the weight of everything he had lost. The toughest man on television had become fragile, and it shocked even his closest fans when the truth emerged. By 2025, at 72, Mr. T is still alive, scarred but resilient. His net worth is modest compared to his peak, yet fans still cheer when he shouts, "I pity the fool." They see a hero. He remembers the man who was consumed by the very image that made him famous. George Peppard as John Hannibal Smith. Colonel John Hannibal Smith was the cigar-chomping mastermind of the A-Team, 1983, and George Peppard wore that role at age 55 with deceptive ease. On screen, he looked like the man who always knew the plan. Off-screen, however, Peppard was fighting for survival in an industry that had nearly abandoned him. His fall from grace had been swift. The man once predicted to rival Paul Newman destroyed his own momentum with tantrums and alcohol. He sabotaged friendships, stormed off sets, and earned a reputation for arrogance so toxic that producers blacklisted him. By the time the A-Team was offered, he was not the first choice. He was the last resort. Even success was poisoned. While Hannibal was adored by audiences, Peppard seethed on set as Mr. T stole the spotlight. The new star power bruised his ego, and tensions became legendary. Behind the cigar and grin, Peppard was a man tormented by the fear that he had already peaked decades earlier and was now being eclipsed in front of millions. His private life was no refuge. 5 marriages collapsed in betrayal and shouting matches, leaving children who barely knew their father. Friends recalled nights when he drank until dawn, furious that the world had forgotten him. In truth, it was his own rage that kept him alone. When lung cancer came, it was almost an epilogue already written. He sold off assets, lived modestly, and died at 65 in 1994, far from the glamour he once embodied. Today, fans celebrate the strategist Hannibal, but Peppard's own life was proof that no plan could save a man determined to destroy himself. Dirk Benedict as Templeton Faceman Peck. Templeton Faceman Peck was the charming conman of the A-Team, 1983, always ready with a smile or a scam. At 38, Dirk Benedict slipped into the role so smoothly it looked effortless. But while Face could talk his way out of any situation, Benedict spent much of his career cornered by misfortune. The scars began long before the cameras. In the early 1970s, Benedict was told he had prostate cancer and might not live to see 40. He fought back with an unconventional diet, and though he survived, the shadow of death haunted every career choice afterward. Survival gave him defiance, but it also made him combative, clashing with producers who wanted him to play safe. He thought the A-Team would erase those years of uncertainty. Instead, it trapped him again. Like Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica, Face was adored, but too charming to be taken seriously. Hollywood refused to see beyond the grin. While his co-stars chased new projects, Benedict found doors quietly closing. His personal life only deepened the wounds. His marriage to Toni Hudson collapsed in 1995, and separation from his two sons filled him with regret. He turned his bitterness into books, attacking feminism and the industry that had sidelined him. The backlash was swift, branding him a relic, not a rebel. Now, in 2025, Benedict is 79, living quietly in Montana. He has money enough to survive, but not to silence the what-ifs. Fans still call him Face, but he admits the irony. The character could charm the world, while the man behind the mask could never win it. Dwight Schultz, as H.M. Howling Mad Murdoch. H.M. Howling Mad Murdoch was the pilot of the A-Team, 1983, a man who could fly anything, but often seemed one step away from insanity. At 36, Dwight Schultz brought him to life with manic energy, turning what could have been a cartoon into a strangely lovable figure. For Schultz, the role was both a blessing and a trap. Before Hollywood, Schultz belonged to the stage. He trained for Shakespeare, for tragedy, for depth. Landing Murdoch felt like a compromise, and even as the laughs rolled in, he feared he had traded legitimacy for exposure. That fear proved real. Casting directors soon decided he could only play lunatics. His struggle to break free nearly failed. When he auditioned for Star Trek: The Next Generation, producers doubted audiences could forget Murdoch. Schultz begged for the chance to prove otherwise. As Reginald Barclay, he delivered a brilliant, anxious engineer, but even then, he remained a supporting figure, never the star. Off-screen, he fought battles few saw. Anxiety attacks, sleepless nights, and career disappointments plagued him. His marriage to actress Wendy Fulton survived, but only because she accepted the toll fame and failure took on him. Their daughter, Ava, grew up with a father whose career never matched his talent. By 2025, Schultz is 77, semi-retired, and remembered mostly by two cult fan bases, the A-Team and Star Trek. He has enough money, enough legacy, but not the freedom he once dreamed of. For Dwight Schultz, the cruel irony was simple. He trained to be a tragic hero and became television's most beloved madman. Jack Ging as General Harlan Bull Fulbright. General Harlan Bull Fulbright wasn't a villain in the A-Team, 1983. He was the soldier convinced he was right, the hunter who never let go. At 52, Jack Ging stepped into the role with quiet authority, embodying the kind of rigid military man audiences both feared and respected. For Ging, the role reflected a career built on second-tier opportunities. He shared the screen with Clint Eastwood in High Plains Drifter, 1973, and popped up in countless TV shows, yet the big breakthrough never came. Casting directors liked his stern face, but rarely trusted him with the lead. Hollywood kept him close enough to survive, never close enough to succeed. Off-screen, life was no kinder. His first marriage collapsed, leaving wounds that strained his bond with his children. A second union with Gretchen Groening offered stability, but never warmth. Friends said he carried himself like Fulbright even in private life, rigid, unreachable, a man whose walls grew taller with age. As acting jobs thinned, isolation deepened. Depression set in as Hollywood forgot him, and his finances shrank to barely $500,000. The proud officer he once played seemed like a cruel echo. Fulbright always had a mission, but Ging often seemed like a man who had lost his. He died on September 9, 2022, at 90. Fans remember the hard-nosed general chasing the A-team. Few knew the quiet tragedy of the actor behind him. A career of almosts, a life shadowed by distance, and an ending defined more by regret than recognition. Lance LeGault as Colonel Roderick Decker. Colonel Roderick Decker was the relentless bloodhound of the A-team, always 2 steps behind, but never giving up. At 48 in 1983, Lance LeGault made Decker one of television's most memorable antagonists. His gravel voice and piercing eyes gave the team their most credible pursuer. But LeGault's career was a patchwork of near misses. He had small but vivid roles in Magnum, Peepwine, and lent his booming voice to video games like Prince of Persia. Yet he never escaped the supporting tier. Hollywood typecast him as the menacing colonel, the intimidating henchman, never the man whose name appeared first on the poster. Home offered little rescue. His first marriage lasted almost 20 years before emotional distance broke it apart. A second marriage to Teresa ended the same way. 4 children were left to navigate life with a father often absent or buried in his own demons. The later years were marked by a spiral he couldn't outrun. Financial struggles mounted, depression ate at him, and heart problems worsened. By the time he died from heart failure in 2012 at age 77, his net worth had dwindled to around $300,000. On screen, Colonel Decker never caught the A-team. Off-screen, Lance LeGault never quite caught the break he needed. Both hunts ended unfinished. Robert Vaughn as General Hunt Stockwell. When the A-team limped into its final season in 1986, Robert Vaughn arrived as General Hunt Stockwell, the shadowy puppeteer pulling strings at age 54. His arrival gave the series a new intrigue, a layer of sophistication, as if television had borrowed a villain from a spy novel. Unlike many of his co-stars, Vaughn had once tasted glory. As Napoleon Solo in The Man from UNCLE, he was a household name. He earned an Oscar nomination for The Young Philadelphians, 1959, and even won a BAFTA. But time is merciless. By the 80s, Vaughn was scrambling for relevance, and the A-team was both a paycheck and a reminder that Hollywood had moved on. His personal life mirrored that duality. He married actress Linda Staub in 1974 and had 2 children, but rumors of infidelity and emotional distance followed him. Fame had filled his life with admirers. Middle age left him surrounded by suspicion. Vaughn himself admitted that loneliness lingered even in the spotlight. As his health declined, leukemia tightened its grip. The once dashing spy spent his last years in quiet struggle, watching his circle shrink while his fortune, around $5 million, seemed small compared to the vast fame he had once commanded. He died on November 11, 2016, just days shy of 84. Fans remember him as Stockwell, as Solo, as the smooth schemer. But for Robert Vaughn, the final act was one of silence, of illness, and of a career that ended with more shadows than applause. Melinda Culea as Amy Amanda Allen. Amy Amanda Allen, the reporter who joined the A-team in 1983, brought a sharp intellect and fresh perspective. At just 28, Melinda Culea gave the show a female voice. Decisive, daring, unwilling to be sidelined. For a brief moment, it looked like she had found her launch pad. But Hollywood is ruthless with its promises. Culea was written out of the A-team after tensions behind the scenes. She drifted into guest spots in Knots Landing and Star Trek, The Next Generation, but none carried her forward. What should have been a breakout turned into a fading memory. Her personal life was equally turbulent. After an early divorce, she slipped into depression and estrangement from her family. A second marriage to director Peter Markle in 1996 offered companionship, but she never had children and admitted in interviews that loneliness often shadowed her. The career setbacks deepened that loneliness. Roles stopped coming. Hollywood, which had once spotlighted her as the female A-team member, closed the door. She withdrew from the industry, slipping into a reclusive life with a fortune barely above $300,000. By 2025, at 69, Melinda Culea lives quietly. Fans who remember Amy see courage and charm. But for Culea, the real story is of an unfinished career. A woman who once stood with the A-Team, only to be left behind when the credits rolled. William Lucking as Colonel Lynch was the face of the Army's obsession with hunting down the A-Team. For William Lucking, cast at 42, it was another chance to remind Hollywood that he could hold the screen. But the industry had already made up its mind. He was never going to be more than the tough guy in the corner. Lucking spent decades wrestling with typecasting. He had the height, the voice, the scowl, but those same gifts turned into shackles. Leading roles went to actors considered bankable, while he was tossed scraps: the enforcer, the colonel, the outlaw. When Sons of Anarchy decades later gave him a prominent part, it was hailed as a comeback. In truth, it was the first real spotlight he had seen in years. The competition crushed him quietly. Every audition meant lining up behind faces with the same hard jaw, the same gravel voice, the same chance to disappear. He won some roles, lost many more, and carried the bruises in silence. Reliable was the word casting directors used, a label that means you'll work but never rise. Even his personal implosions were tied to the grind. Infidelity ended his first marriage. Alcohol picked up to numb the rejection, poisoned his bond with his daughters. A second marriage fell apart too, collateral damage from an actor always chasing jobs that never delivered. By the time liver disease consumed him, he was left with about $1 million, a modest pile after half a century of work. He died in 2021, at 80, remembered as Colonel Lynch. The man who played the Army's relentless hunter had spent his whole career being relentlessly hunted by obscurity. Eddie Velez as Frankie Santana. Frankie Santana was supposed to bring new life to the A-Team in 1986. At 28, Eddie Velez was cast as the team's special effects expert. Young, fast-talking, a contrast to the older core cast. On paper, he looked like the franchise's future. In practice, he was swallowed alive. The final season was already wobbling. Ratings slid, critics mocked the formula, and the magic was fading. Velez walked into a sinking ship, and the blame was quietly pinned on him, the new guy who never fit. Hollywood doesn't forgive bad timing. His character vanished when the show ended, and so did his momentum. Other roles came: General Hospital, True Blue, but they carried the stench of failure. Producers remembered him as the one who didn't save the A-Team. He wasn't just fighting competitors in auditions. He was fighting the shadow of a franchise collapse that no one let him forget. Personal disasters piled on. A divorce drained him emotionally and financially. Estrangement from his children hardened into guilt. Alcohol became a crutch, depression a daily weight. Every lost audition reopened old wounds, a reminder that Frankie Santana was supposed to be a door, but became a dead end. Now, in 2025, at 66, Velez lives on the edges of Hollywood, his net worth barely $200,000. Fans who remember Frankie recall the energy and invention. Velez remembers the curse of being hired to save a show already beyond saving. Morgan Woodward as Bus Carter. By the time Morgan Woodward appeared in the A-Team at 58, he had already been the intimidating presence in Cool Hand Luke, 1967, and a memorable villain in Dallas. He had the resume of a workhorse, but never the crown of a star. The real cruelty of his career was visibility without recognition. Audiences remembered his face, those piercing eyes, that cold stare, but almost never his name. He was Hollywood's definition of that guy. Leading roles went to men deemed prettier or more versatile. Woodward was too rough, too specific, too much of a character actor. He battled the same competitors for decades, the same pool of heavies lined up for the same auditions. Sometimes he won. Often he didn't. Even when he earned an Emmy nomination, the applause faded quickly. He was still the reliable villain, never the celebrated star. The personal cost was enormous. His marriage dissolved, his connection to his son was tenuous, and he slipped into isolation. Success without recognition curdled into loneliness. By the time heart disease slowed him, he had the respect of peers, but little of the adoration he craved. When he died in 2019 at 93, obituaries called him one of television's great villains. They were right, but the word villain carried the same sting it always had, a career of being remembered, but never truly known. Marla Heasley as Tanya Baker. At 24, Marla Heasley was cast as Tanya Baker, the bold reporter who briefly joined the A-Team. It should have been her chance to stand out, the only young woman in a male-driven series. Instead, it became the role that defined her as disposable. Producers added her for freshness, but never gave her depth. Scripts treated her as a prop, and when ratings didn't improve, she was written out without ceremony. In Hollywood terms, she hadn't failed. She had simply been deemed unnecessary. That label stuck like a scar. After the A-Team, she fought for relevance. Guest spots in Hunter came and went, but casting agents remembered her as the one who didn't last. In an industry where longevity is currency, Heasley was marked as expendable from the start. Her personal life reflected the same fragility. A painful divorce left her depressed and distant from family. A later marriage in 2001 to Christopher Harriman brought stability, but not fulfillment. With no children and no steady career, the silence of roles unoffered echoed loudly. By 2025, at 65, she lives quietly with a net worth of $250,000. Fans who recall Tanya Baker see bravery and brightness. Heasley herself sees the cruel truth. She was written out of a show, and in many ways, written out of Hollywood too. Red West, as Lieutenant Trask. Red West entered the A-Team in 1983, not as a star on the rise, but as a man fighting to be taken seriously. At 47, he played Lieutenant Trask, the bulldog officer chasing the team. But to most of Hollywood, West was still Elvis Presley's former bodyguard, a label that clung to him like a scar. Every audition was a reminder of that past. Casting directors whispered Elvis connection before they even read his name. His break in Roadhouse, 1989, should have been a turning point, yet he was again cast as a disposable tough guy. The industry didn't want West the actor. It wanted West the presence, a man who could glower and throw a punch, then step aside. Competition made it worse. The 1980s were crowded with broad-shouldered men who looked just like him. He was competing not just against actors, but against his own typecast reflection. To break free, he would have needed a miracle role, and miracles rarely come for men already pigeonholed. The strain pushed him into destructive choices. Alcohol numbed the sting of rejection but poisoned his family ties. 2 marriages collapsed, his children grew distant, and the life he built around loyalty, first to Elvis, then to Hollywood, crumbled. When heart disease and an aortic aneurysm ended his life in 2017, he left behind about $300,000 and a filmography full of tough guy credits. Red West had spent a lifetime proving he was more than a bodyguard, but Hollywood never let him win that fight. Carl Franklin as Captain Crane. Carl Franklin's appearance as Captain Crane in the A-Team, 1983, at age 34, looked minor, almost forgettable. But for Franklin, it was part of a larger struggle. The quiet suffocation of being a black actor in an industry with no imagination. Again and again, he was put in uniforms. Cops, officers, authority figures with no depth. Hollywood saw discipline in his face, but ignored the artistry in his craft. He competed in a narrow lane, auditioning for roles written with cliches baked in, always against the same handful of black actors. The ceiling was low, and the air was thin. Franklin's escape route was directing. With Devil in a Blue Dress, 1995, he finally shaped a story on his own terms, digging into America's racial history with Denzel Washington. The film drew critical praise but failed commercially, a cruel reminder that even when black filmmakers broke through, the system found ways to punish them. He had traded one battlefield for another. As an actor, he was invisible. As a director, he was celebrated but underfunded. Hollywood's message was clear. He could tell important stories, but he would have to fight for every dollar and every audience. By 2025, Franklin, now 75, looks back with pride and regret in equal measure. He escaped the box of Captain Crane, but only by leaving acting behind. His career is proof that sometimes survival in Hollywood means abandoning the dream that brought you there. Sergio Calderon as El Cajon. Sergio Calderon's role as El Cajon in the A-Team, 1983 at 38, was brief but telling. Hollywood loved him as the cunning adversary, the sly foreigner, the schemer. And that was the problem. It never wanted him as anything else. Typecasting was his prison. He went on to appear in Men in Black, 1997, where audiences laughed at his bizarre alien cameo. Calderon knew the truth. The role was written as a joke, playing off his accent and his otherness. For every job he landed, 100 meaningful roles were never offered. Latino actors of his generation fought for the same scraps, and he was no exception. The competition was ruthless. While white peers fought for depth and prestige, Calderon and his colleagues fought to avoid humiliation. Too often, success meant accepting another stereotyped part, cashing the paycheck, and swallowing the pride. His legacy became one of endurance, not recognition. That endurance came at a cost. A broken marriage, 2 distant children, and alcoholism marked his private life. As his health failed with heart disease and respiratory issues, his career offered no comfort. He was remembered, yes, but not respected. Calderon died in 2023 at 77, leaving behind about $400,000 and a resume crowded with caricatures. For fans, he will always be the tricky El Cajon or the alien in Men in Black. For Calderon, the tragedy was simpler. Hollywood kept him visible but never let him be seen. Nick Dimitri as Scarface's muscle. Nick Dimitri was 51 when he appeared in the A-Team, 1983, as Scarface's muscle, a brutal henchman who added force to the violence of the show's action. For viewers, he was just another body tossed into the brawl. For Dimitri, it was the story of his career, a man who spent decades in Hollywood, mostly being thrown around. Dimitri's background as a stuntman gave him steady work. He doubled for stars, absorbed punishment in fight scenes, and played anonymous goons on camera. But while actors got applause, stuntmen got bruises. He competed in a field where toughness mattered more than recognition, and the very skills that kept him employed kept him invisible. He fought for bigger chances, landing parts in action films like Scarface, 1983, where his physicality stood out. Yet even there, credit was minimal. Audiences remembered the stars, Al Pacino, the gangsters, the spectacle, not the man who took hits so the scene would work. Hollywood rewarded him with checks, not with names in lights. Years of falls and fights took a toll. Joint problems and chronic pain ended his stunt career, forcing him into retreat. 2 marriages broke under financial strain and his withdrawn nature, leaving him with a daughter he rarely saw. His reputation was of a man who could endure anything on set, but in private, endurance meant living alone with regrets. When he died in 2021 at 88, his net worth was about $200,000, a modest sum for a lifetime of physical sacrifice. Nick Dimitri's story is a harsh reminder. Hollywood's action is built on bodies like his, but those bodies rarely get remembered when the cameras stop rolling. Anthony James as Connors. Anthony James was 41 when he joined the A-Team as Connors, a menacing villain whose towering frame and cold stare gave the show real menace. For James, it was just another step in a career chained to villainy. His face, gaunt, severe, unforgettable, was his passport and his curse. Hollywood saw him as a specialist in menace. Standing 6 feet 6 inches, James was cast as killers, outlaws, and henchmen, never heroes. He leaned into it, knowing typecasting paid bills, but it also locked every door to growth. When Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, 1992, won Best Picture, James had one of his strongest supporting roles, yet even there, his face was a threat, not a character with a future. Competition for villain roles was brutal. Every casting call brought a lineup of men with scars, sneers, and intimidating builds. James had the edge in height, but little else. He spoke in interviews about how playing villains gave him work, but robbed him of range. "They never wanted me to smile." Off-screen, he lived with the loneliness that came from being Hollywood's permanent outsider. He settled in Arlington, Massachusetts, living alone, where depression shadowed him. His second career as a painter gave him peace and some income, but not the connection he missed from a broader career. He died of cancer in 2020 at 77, with an estate of about $500,000, much of it from art, not film. To fans, he remains the face you never forget, a villain's villain. To James, the tragedy was that Hollywood remembered his look more than his talent. The A-Team taught us that with courage, loyalty, and a clever plan, you could survive anything. But as time has shown, even heroes cannot escape the weight of reality. Their journeys from 1983 to 2025 are stories of triumph, struggle, and heartbreaking change. So after seeing who they became, do you still recognize the legends you once admired? Tell us in the comments and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next untold story.